Hello everyone, I hope this finds you all well and safe. On the behalf of the EU delegation to Ukraine, I would like to welcome you all to this first information session on our currently launched Ukraine Civil Society Facility Call for Proposals. My name is Sinziana Poiana and I am the Program Officer for Civil Society Support in the EU delegation to Ukraine. Together with my colleagues in the EU delegation, we have been working very hard to put out a call for proposals, a competition for funding that would be very useful and very suitable to civil society's needs in Ukraine. For this first session, what we have in mind is to go through some of the questions that you also raised when you first saw this call on the 16th of June. First, I will walk you through the main elements of the civil society policy in Ukraine. Then we will move on to what are the main elements of this competition, who does it address, what type of funding are we making available, how can you apply? By the way, this was one of the most frequent questions that you submitted in your registration form. And of course, what are the future steps? And from our point of view, what would be a few tips for you to submit and elaborate a successful application in this call. The first point on our agenda, a few elements of our engagement policy with civil society in Ukraine. The most important thing is to know that since 2012, the European Union has been recognizing civil society actors as actors of governance in all the countries where it engages outside the European Union. From this, there are a number of ramifications. First of all, what is civil society for us? This, by the way, is a point that you will recognize in the eligibility requirements for this funding opportunity. Civil society for us is any civic actor between citizen and the government that is non-political and non-violent. Therefore, we have a very wide definition and we welcome a lot of different types of organizations to apply for our calls for proposals. This is very important for you to keep in mind whenever you think whether this call is suitable for you or not. A second very important point of our civil society policy is the three priorities for engagement. First, promoting and supporting development of capacities of civil societies in the countries where we engage. Second, supporting civil society to become a partner in policy dialogue at all levels of government, including with the European Union. And third, promoting a conducive or enabling environment for civil society organizations. You will see all these elements transposed in the call that you are now interested in applying for. Our main point of reference when it comes to the implementation of the EU civil society policy in Ukraine is, of course, the EU roadmap for engagement with civil society. Here. This has been created with the support of civil society here. You have all provided input as to what is most important for you, and this is a document that has been endorsed by all the EU member states present in Ukraine. Therefore, you will see the main elements of this document reflected in what we aim to achieve by making available this funding in the current call for the Ukraine Civil Society Facility. This leads us to our next point. How did we actually elaborate this call? I think that we are all in the donor community aware of some of the criticism that is being brought to us, that sometimes we set our priorities a bit in disconnect with civil society. I would like to assure you that this specific call has not been the case. In fact, since October last year, we have been conducting consultations with civil society, with other donors in Ukraine, and with other relevant actors to see what would be most meaningful to you and what would be most important for the European Union to invest here through civil society in Ukraine. So you will see now a call that has multiple sector priorities and that has been tailored to our understanding of civil society that works in specific sectors in Ukraine. So what is this call actually about? We have defined this general objective as supporting civil society organizations to promote inclusive democracy here in Ukraine. If you go through the guidelines, you will see we have 7 priorities. Yes, 7. We know it is a lot, but it does reflect our understanding and what we think you also understand of what inclusive democracy is. Namely, sustainable development, culture support, independent media, public administration reform and public finance management, rule of law, justice and law enforcement, human rights, and participation of civil society in the implementation of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, as well as support to think tanks that would contribute to its objectives. Before we move forward, I would like to underline a number of cross-cutting issues that are very, very important for EU policy in general. I'm mentioning this now because these are also things that will be evaluated during the application review, and it is important for us to keep in mind that they do reflect a certain global status of civil society and a certain idea of what civil society can contribute. So independently on the topics that you will be addressing or the priorities you will be applying for, you need to keep in mind that for us, being aware of what is happening is very important. Namely, the fact that we are still in the middle of a pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic, the fact that it will take a number of years for civil society and our societies to recompose, to recover from this crisis. This is something that we acknowledge and we also take into consideration when we designed this call and now when we expect to see your applications. Another element is the rights-based approach. Most of you may be already aware that the European Union has a rights-based approach to all its international development support, including civil society support. What does that mean? In principle, it means that whatever action you would design or propose needs to serve the rights and interests of the beneficiaries. And when we evaluate, we will look whether you have taken that into consideration. The third element is gender equality. The EU has been pioneering its gender action plan at global level, and we expect the issues that concern gender equality here in Ukraine to be reflected in all your actions. And yes, gender is present in all areas of life, and it will have repercussions on everything that you would propose or intend to do. From our point of view, these three elements, responding to the COVID-19 crisis, implementing and understanding the rights-based approach to development, and gender equality, are not just cross-cutting elements. They are elements that show us how much thought you put into your action, how well you know your beneficiaries. This is why they are so important for us when we do the evaluation of your proposals. Without further ado, what is this funding opportunity about? First thing on the agenda, how much money is available? We would believe that this is of everyone's interest. We make available up to 12.5 million euro, which is the highest amount ever put up in a competition to civil society by the EU in Ukraine. This amount is divided into 7 lots. You really need to pay attention when you look at the guidelines to make sure that the lot you would be applying under corresponds to what you intend to apply for and that you do follow the specifications in that specific lot. You will have different minimum and maximum sizes of grants. You will have different eligibility criteria in some cases. You will have different rules on whether you can subgrant or not to other parties, what type of procedures apply when you will end up implementing your project. So it is very, very important for you to decide, after you have first read the guidelines, in which lot you would like to apply, or maybe you want to apply in more. This, by the way, is also possible. And then try to make sure that you do follow the specifications of the specific lot as much as possible. I cannot stress enough how important this is. Those of you who have applied before for our calls, you know that the rules are very, very strict. We would really, really be very sad to have to exclude proposals or dismiss applications just because of technical details. So please attend the next information sessions, read the lots, ask questions if you are not sure, but make sure that you do follow the technical specifications because there was a lot of thought put into that. and we will expect that they are fulfilled when we receive your proposal. Here in this slide, Financial Allocations 1, you are able to see how much of the 12.5 million euro is dedicated to which thematic priority and what is the respective minimum and maximum amount of a grant that you can request from the EU. Take a moment to look at this. You will also find the same information in the guidelines for call proposals. Another very important aspect of our funding through this call is the co-funding rate. In other words, how much out of the project that you propose can the EU support you with. In this case, it is minimum 60% and maximum 90%. That means that in almost all cases, and I will speak about exceptions a little bit later, you need to find 10% of co-funding. This means funding that can come from your own resources, from other donors, from the private sector, or whatever non-EU funding source. All projects need to have at least 24 months of implementation and at most 36 months of implementation. There is some thinking behind this as well. We wouldn't want to make an investment in something that would be very short-lived. At the same time, we know that past 3 years, most projects would need to readjust to new realities. Also bearing in mind that the projects that will ultimately be funded under this call for proposals will start implementation in approximately a year's time. Maybe a little bit shorter, but this is the time span that it takes for us to run a complete competition for funding. Where the action that you propose takes place is also important. Most of the actions need to take place in Ukraine or have to be to the benefit of Ukrainian citizens, Ukrainian civil society, or Ukraine at large. However, again, you need to read very carefully the specifications and the intentions behind each lot, specifically the one that you would like to apply for. You will see that some of them do open the possibility for you to submit actions that take place in other Eastern Partnership countries, in EU member states, as long as it makes sense within the context of your action. Probably one of the most frequent questions that we received through your registration forms: who can apply? Well, if you go to the eligibility criteria section of this call, you will see that per lot there are different eligibility criteria. As a bare minimum, you need to be a civil society organization, a registered civil society organization in Ukraine. This will be checked against the statutes of your organizations. That means you need to have a legal form that qualifies as a civil society organization, and that you need to have formal registration documents. The second criteria is that this civil society organization, registered, needs to be not for profit. We will be checking statutes, registrations from tax authorities, or financial statements and budgets to make sure that you are not for profit in order to be eligible to receive this funding. In order to access this funding, you will need to be established in Ukraine. There are a few exceptions, for example, for Lot 6, the human rights support, that is open to everyone, everywhere. Therefore, any civil society organization from around the world can apply for this funding, as long, again, remember, as long as the action takes place mostly in Ukraine. And for Lot 7, where partnerships with international actors are encouraged. Very important for you to note that whatever eligibility you will see for the lead applicant, the organization that would ultimately submit this proposal, whatever criteria for eligibility applies to them would apply to any partners in this proposal. For legal reasons, there are different partnerships that you can establish. And I do encourage all of you to read through the guidelines to understand what are the rights and obligations of these various types of partnerships. A full partnership is what we call a co-applicant. This is when a partner would equally share the rights and obligations with the organization that actually submits the proposal. The eligibility criteria that apply to the lead applicant apply also to whoever is proposed also as co-applicant. You may remember I was telling you in the beginning of this presentation that the way that we designed this call was to answer the demand and the needs of civil society that works in specific sectors in Ukraine. From this point of view, again, you need to really pay attention to the eligibility criteria that apply to certain lots. You will see that for co-applicants in certain lots, the eligibility is much wider. For example, for Lot 1, working on sustainable development, we consider that partnerships with local authorities are quite important. So we wanted to leave this possibility for civil society organizations to propose projects that would be implemented together with local authorities. Therefore, under this specific lot, local authorities are also eligible as co-applicants. For Lot 5, rule of law, justice, you will see that this is also open to international organizations. This comes from the idea that international organizations can bring a lot of technical expertise specifically in this field, which is why, again, we left it up to you whether you would want to partner with such an organization in order to apply for this call. Continuing on the topic of partnerships, in the guidelines you will find different other types of partnerships that can be reflected. Again, very important to look at the rights and obligations that these different legal connections and legal recognition can give to this type of applicants, namely affiliated entities, associates, and contractors. I will let you look at the slides and consult the guidelines for a more legal definition of what this means and how the relationship between the lead applicant and this type of partnership is entailed. What I would like to underline is that in the case of affiliated entities, you would need to have a legal link, and you will need to prove that either through your statutes or in a different form, for example, a financial transaction, that there is an actual link between the two organizations. An affiliated entity is not just some loose partner that is not registered as a co-applicant. If you end up in the final stage of selection, we will check whether there is some sort of legal document that would prove that the organization that you submitted on your proposal is truly an affiliated entity. Moving on, what types of actions are we supporting? You will see in the guidelines, again, a very long list of types of actions that we would be willing to support. This list is not exhaustive. This was just what we were able to identify based on the consultations with you, on what we know that civil society would want to do and is willing to do, and also a little bit of pushing you a little bit further towards innovation and towards trying to get maybe different types of projects financed on this occasion. But in general, you will see that this list covers most of the things that civil society already does. And if the action that you would want to propose is not in the list, do not worry about it. As long as the other criteria are there, again, this list is not exhaustive. Therefore, we encourage you to still submit it. In fact, we will be happy to learn what other types of actions civil society would be able to deliver. When we discussed financial allocations, you probably noticed that the size of the grants is quite high. Those who have worked with the EU before or have been following our funding, you probably noticed that the average size of the grants that we make available for civil society organizations has been increasing. At the same time, in the past 3 to 4 years, our policy has slowly been evolving from funding projects that are dedicated to supporting one or a selected group of civil society organizations, namely the lead applicant and its partners, towards strengthening organizations that can work as a multiplier, including by what we call financial support to third parties. There is a catch behind this legal definition, and this is why you will see it there as financial support to third parties. Most of you take advantage or see this reflected in reality through subgranting. Whenever you see an EU partner launching their own calls for proposals and making available funding through an already awarded EU grant. There are other types of financial support to third parties that you may want to consider. Of course, it needs to make sense in the context of your action, in the context of what you propose, but you will see that 3 lots out of the 7 that are now open for competition require you to have some sort of financial support to third parties included in your action. This means that you need to find a way to be a multiplier of the action and the ideas that you promote by engaging other civic groups. When it comes to financial support to third parties, again, it is up to you how you do it, how you define it, who does it target, as long as it is clearly stipulated in the rules of your organization endorsed by your board. You are fully on the lead of this, and this, of course, will have various ramifications, including, we hope, create a little bit more innovation and make also our support, with your help, a little bit closer to the needs of the beneficiaries. You will also see that the rest of the lots, 1, 2, 5, and 6, allow for this type of support. But again, pay attention whether it is mandatory or not. Your proposal may be rejected solely on this reason. If for lots 3, 4, and 7, it does not include any form of financial support to third parties. This call for proposals, as many others that have been launched in Ukraine in the past years, is a 2-stage call. First, you need to submit a concept note, for which now you have a deadline for the 14th of August to submit. Then you need to prepare your full application. We are going through all of these topics now because it is important for you already at this stage, even though it is not required in the concept note application form, to think ahead on which elements and how do you create the premises for a good project at full application. We assume that everyone who submits a concept note has the ambition to go to full application stage and ultimately obtain funding. Therefore, things like eligibility of costs, you need to have in mind already. When you will end up at the point where you need to design your budget for the full application, what exactly can this funding cover for and what it cannot. This you will see it all in the section related to eligibility of costs. There are 2 important elements that I would like to highlight already now because they are important for the way that you will design your budget, hopefully at the full application stage. First, when we were speaking about your co-funding rate and this minimum 10% that you need to assure, know that now the EU makes available the possibility for you to use volunteer work as a form of co-funding. Check out the guidelines and see what are the rules for that. But for many organizations that do mobilization of volunteers, work with interns that receive just the minimum remuneration, this can actually be a recognition of the work that you do. For us, the scope is twofold: to create more mobilization, but to also recognize the very valuable work that volunteers and interns are doing for civil society organizations. A second very important element is the use of simplified cost options. Again, you have extensive information about this in the guidelines, and it would be very interesting for you to already have a look at this stage at what the simplified cost options are. At the full application stage, this can help you organize your budget in a way that is easier for you to manage and for us as well, and ultimately provide for a more lenient financial reporting cycle. We hope that as a result of this call, a lot of you will end up receiving EU funding, either directly or as a partner or as a recipient of financial support to third parties. However, once your project will start, there are also a number of elements to also keep in mind that have to do with the eligibility requirements stemming from the guidelines for this call for proposals. We are very, very strict and very keen on enforcing our ethics rules. This have to do with human rights respect, anti-corruption rules and anti-bribery, and of course avoiding that our contractual partners breach their contractual obligations. Therefore, I would like to invite you, in addition to the guidelines, to go through the annexes of a contract for you to understand what does it mean to enter in a contractual relationship with us. Again, ethical norms are very important for the European Union, and through our monitoring system, which is quite complex, we try to ensure that all our partners abide to these ethical norms. So now you have everything you need to know, at least to help you decide whether you are going to apply for this call or not. If you have decided to apply, then how do you do it? First point, try to register in PADOR. Start already now. If you do not have a PADOR profile, create one. If you have one, try to retrieve it, try to find your password. It takes some technical work to get this set up, so it is really not too early. This should not be left in any circumstance for the last 3 days before the deadline for application. You can do it now. PADOR is actually not a registration system that is necessarily linked to your application, but it is linked to your organization. PADOR stands for Potential Applicants Database. So, if you are interested now for this call or for a different call that the European Union would launch for civil society organizations, having a profile there, completing all the necessary information is something that you will eventually need to do. So it is not an investment that is not worth making. So I encourage you all today to go and register in PADOR, retrieve your passwords, and make sure you can sign your data there without any technical issues. As I mentioned before, this is a two-step call. First, you will draft and submit your concept note application. This is Annex A1 in your package for application, and you will see there extensive instructions on the type of information that we need submitted, but also that it is quite concise, because at this stage it will be very important for us to assess the relevance of your proposal. In fact, the scores that you will receive now for the relevance of your proposal, if successful at the next stage, will still be taken into consideration for your final evaluation. So again, it is very, very important for you to already think about your action and how it would finally look like. It is not just a prospective exercise on drafting a concept note. It is really the quintessence of what your project will be. It is an elevator pitch. It is showing proficiency, that you know what you're doing and that you know who your beneficiaries are and what their problems are, and that in comparison to other people that you may be competing against, that you are able to provide the best logical intervention that you can in order to fix this problem either in your community or at national level. At this stage, we need the concept note and the concept note alone. You do not need to submit any other annexes. You do not need to submit the log frame or the budget. However, it is highly advisable for you to think ahead on how your log frame will look like. One very important reason for you to do so is the fact that you do need to submit a tentative budget, how much you would expect the EU to finance your project by. And the variation between what you submit now and what you will be asking at full application cannot be higher than 20%. So again, I highly advise everyone to sit down, think of their log frame, discuss with their partners, and see already, should they be at full application stage, what would that budget look like, what would their log frame look like, so that you have a clear understanding of what is the relevance of your project and how do you intend to carry it out. And this, I can assure you, will come out very strongly and very clearly in the concept note. Once you are ready with all of that, you need to submit it online via another system called Prospect. Prospect is quite easy to use. You will fill in Annex A1 and just upload it in the system. In Annex A1 at the end, you will have a checklist. Note that this is also the checklist that we use internally to make sure that the application fulfill our minimum standards. I encourage all of you, before you click that submit button, to go through the checklist and be self-critical whether you have submitted and you met all the requirements, including met the deadline, have filled in all the sections of Annex A1, have a functioning PADOR profile. So do that as an internal exercise so you wouldn't have surprises later on. So you've decided to apply, you applied, and now will you move on to full application stage or not? Here are a few elements that again you should take into consideration when you draft your concept note. From our point of view, they will be quite meaningful on whether you will be successful further on or not. First, the evaluation grid for your proposal, the one that we will also use, is already in the guidelines. Use it. Check against your proposal. Do you meet, and how would you grade yourself should you read this proposal against this evaluation grid? The competition for our funding is quite high. What we look for is proposals that can show that they have a genuine interest and understanding in the needs of their communities and beneficiaries, that they understood how to raise these issues at national level, that make a compelling argument for the use of a certain amount of funds for the specific actions that they propose, and in general, applications that give us a reason to want to know more on how this will be done in practice. And yet another reminder to go back to the eligibility and to our exclusion criteria. Even a very good concept note can be rejected if it doesn't pass the administrative checks in Annex A1, or if it doesn't meet the criteria stated in the guidelines for their specific lots. This can include the minimum and maximum size of the EU contribution or the status of your organization. So do pay attention to these little details, as they can make the difference on whether you will move forward in competing for this funding or not. Many of you have registered for this session and have submitted your questions. Before moving forward to some of the specific questions that you have asked, I would have a very important reminder for everyone. Independently on whether you are asking questions now during the information sessions, and this goes for the session today or the ones to follow, if you have a specific question that you would want answered, please send it to the email address indicated in the guidelines, because this will also give you a legal reference for our official answer. We hope as many of you have registered for the rest of the sessions as well. We have 4 of them tomorrow and 3 the day after. You can see here on the slide the full schedule, and remember to always send in specific clarification requests that you may have by email to the email address indicated on the slide. The deadline for that is July 24, and we will reply in maximum 10 days after that. The deadline is August 14 for the concept note, and on that, I would like to thank everyone for attending this session today. I hope that you found it useful, and I look forward to receiving your questions in writing, and I do wish everyone a lot of luck with their applications. Thank you very much.